Imagine being trapped on a plane, thousands of feet above the ground, and the person who is supposed to help refuses to do their job, not because they're incompetent, but because of the color of your skin. This is the story of Leonard, a billionaire grandfather and his teenage granddaughter Zoe, whose ordinary flight to California turns into a nightmare. Locked in a bathroom, scared for her life, Zoe calls out to her grandfather. And what happens next shocks everyone on board. A flight attendant's arrogance and racism push Leonard to the edge. But he's not about to let humiliation or prejudice win. If you want to see how this intense, real-life inspired story unfolds, make sure to like, comment, and share, because this is one flight you won't forget. The moment Zoe screamed, Leonard's heart skipped a beat. The tiny metal door between her and safety had slammed shut, and she was trapped inside. Up here 30,000 feet above the ground, there was no one to call but the flight attendants, and one in particular. Vanessa, who seemed determined to ignore them. Leonard, a billionaire used to solving problems with money and influence, never imagined he'd feel powerless on a plane, especially not when it was his granddaughter's safety at stake. Every second stretched into an eternity as Zoe's cries echoed down the narrow aisle. Passengers glanced around, some whispering, some frozen in awkward silence, while Leonard approached Vanessa, expecting professionalism. But professionalism didn't exist here. Her cold, dismissive glare told him everything. She thought she could treat him, and his granddaughter, however she pleased. And worse, it wasn't just about the locked bathroom anymore. This was about respect, authority, and the sheer injustice of being ignored in a moment that demanded action. Leonard tried reason. He tried pleading. He tried commanding. Every word was met with scoffs, sharp rolls of the eyes, and a humiliating spectacle in front of dozens of passengers. The situation spiraled. Zoe's panic grew. The clock ticked, and Leonard realized he was facing more than a locked door. He was facing prejudice at 30,000 feet, but Leonard wasn't a man who backed down. Billionaire or not, grandfather or not, he refused to let Vanessa's arrogance or racism endanger his family. Somewhere between fear, anger, and sheer determination, he began plotting a solution, one that would not only free Zoe but make sure Vanessa, and everyone who underestimated him, would never forget who he was. How does a single man, bound by the confines of an airplane, take control of a situation when every authority figure seems to turn their back? What lengths will Leonard go to save Zoe and reclaim dignity in the face of humiliation? Stay with us, because this isn't just a story about a locked bathroom. It's about courage, power, and the fight for justice, miles above the clouds. Leonard always believed that life had taught him every lesson he could need. At 74, he had built an empire from nothing, earned the respect of boardrooms, and watched neighborhoods flourish under his philanthropy. Yet despite all the wealth, the accolades, and the shiny offices in towering skyscrapers, the most important part of his life was simple: Zoe, his 15-year-old granddaughter. Zoe was sharp, curious, and unafraid to speak her mind. She had grown up listening to stories of resilience and triumph, learning that courage wasn't about avoiding fear, it was about facing it. Leonard had spent the last few months preparing for this trip, their journey to California to visit Zoe's parents, who had just moved to Los Angeles. It was supposed to be a joyful, ordinary flight. Snacks, laughter, a little turbulence, and conversations about the city they would explore together. They arrived at the airport early. Leonard, always meticulous, had booked first-class seats for the comfort of both his aging legs and Zoe's restless energy. As they walked through the bustling terminal, Leonard noticed the usual glances, some admiring, some indifferent, but he shrugged them off. People stared at billionaires all the time, and Zoe laughed whenever someone mistook him for a celebrity. "Grandpa, you're famous," she teased, nudging him playfully. "Only in your eyes, kiddo," he replied with a warm chuckle, ruffling her hair. The plane was sleek, spotless, gleaming under the overhead lights. Leonard and Zoe settled into their seats, bags tucked neatly, laptops and books at the ready. Around them, passengers chatted quietly, scrolling through their phones, half watching the safety video as it played on screens above. Leonard thought of the hours they would spend together in the clouds, reading, planning, and maybe even letting Zoe nap on his shoulder. Yet, As the plane doors closed, Leonard felt a subtle shift. A flight attendant approached. Vanessa, bright uniform crisp, makeup perfect, but her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. There was something in the way she glanced at Leonard, almost like she was assessing him, deciding his worth. A fleeting look, easy to miss, but for Leonard, it was a reminder. No matter how high you climbed in life, some people still measured you by the color of your skin. Zoe didn't notice. She bounced in her seat, excited to begin the adventure. Leonard forced a smile, telling himself it was nothing, just the faint echo of a society that hadn't yet learned to see him fully. He adjusted his seatbelt, pulled out a book for Zoe, and tried to focus on the calm hum of engines. Little did they know, the luxury, the comfort, and even their meticulously planned trip were about to collide with an ugly reality. A moment of prejudice, subtle yet sharp, was waiting to strike, and the locked bathroom that would soon trap Zoe was only the beginning. The friendly skies they expected were about to turn into a battleground, one where Leonard would be forced to fight not just for his granddaughter's safety, but for dignity, respect, and justice in a world that sometimes refused to see him as more than a number on a balance sheet. The first sign that the flight would be anything but ordinary came just minutes after takeoff. Zoe had finished reading a chapter from her book and excused herself to use the restroom. Leonard watched her go, adjusting his seat, feeling the familiar sense of protection every grandfather feels for his granddaughter. But when the bathroom door clicked behind her, it didn't open again. "Zoe?" Leonard called, rising from his seat. The hum of the engines made his voice soft, almost swallowed by the cabin, but her faint, panicked reply carried to him. "Grandpa." "Help! I can't get out!" He pushed toward the lavatory, heart hammering. The door was stuck, wedged in a way that seemed deliberate. Leonard knocked gently, then more firmly, his voice laced with growing worry. "Zoe, hold on! I'm coming!" A flight attendant appeared from the aisle, Vanessa. Leonard straightened, assuming she would immediately understand the urgency. But instead of stepping forward, she hesitated, her lips pressed tight. When he explained the situation, her gaze flicked over him in a way that made Leonard's chest tighten. Not disbelief, not concern, but irritation. "I'm sorry, sir," she said with icy calm, "but the door seems fine from my end." "Perhaps you should wait." "Wait?" Leonard's voice was sharp now, incredulous. "My granddaughter is trapped. Open it." Vanessa's lips curved into a faint smirk. "Sir, you need to calm down. You're making a scene." The words hit harder than the turbulence outside. Leonard realized with a sinking feeling that this wasn't simply incompetence. It was dismissal, an intentional, subtle form of prejudice. She was underestimating him, ignoring his authority and concern, simply because of the color of his skin. Leonard's fingers clenched into fists. Around him, passengers began to notice, murmuring uneasily. Some looked at Zoe's locked bathroom, some at Leonard, but no one intervened. The atmosphere grew thick, quietly judgmental, almost conspiratorial. Leonard could feel the stares weighing him down, the silent assumption that his status didn't matter here. He leaned close to Vanessa, speaking low, measured but firm. "Open the door, now." Vanessa stepped back, arms crossed, her tone dismissive. "Sir, I said there's nothing wrong. You're being dramatic. The word stung. Leonard's blood boiled, not just for Zoe's immediate danger, but for the audacity of a stranger to treat him like he was invisible in a moment of crisis. His hands shook, but he kept his composure. Billionaire or not, he knew rage had to be precise. He wouldn't escalate in a way that gave her an excuse, but he would make her accountable. He turned to the other passengers, his voice calm but commanding. "Excuse me, my granddaughter is trapped. If anyone here understands safety or responsibility, you'd know this is an emergency." Whispers spread through the cabin. Some passengers muttered to themselves, some looked down. Leonard realized how alone they were, not just physically in a locked bathroom situation, but socially. Vanessa had not only ignored him, she had humiliated him publicly, asserting a twisted power by making him seem overreacting. Zoe's muffled voice cracked from inside the restroom. "Grandpa, please." "I'm scared." Leonard's chest tightened. The fear in her voice ignited something primal, a mix of fury, love, and determination. He had faced countless business crises in his life, but nothing had ever been like this, being trapped with bureaucracy, prejudice, and public humiliation all at once. He tried reasoning again. Softer this time. "Vanessa, I'm giving you one last chance. This is a child. You will unlock that door now, or there will be consequences, serious ones." Her smirk widened, the air around them thick with tension. "Sir, you can't threaten me on my job. Maybe you don't understand how things work here." Leonard felt the cabin's weight pressing down, a theater of silent judgment. Other passengers avoided his gaze, some shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The humiliation, his power ignored, his granddaughter in danger, burned inside him like a fire refusing to die. But Leonard wasn't just any man. He was resourceful, unshakable, and he had lived long enough to know how to turn a disadvantage into leverage. This wasn't just about the door anymore. It was about respect, dignity, and justice. He scanned the surroundings, thinking fast. Every second Zoe spent trapped made the problem exponentially worse. And then he saw the first opening, a subtle oversight in the cabin layout, a key he could use, a loophole in procedure. His mind raced as adrenaline surged. He wouldn't just rescue Zoe. He would make a statement. Vanessa, and anyone else who assumed wealth, status, and color could be dismissed, would understand precisely who Leonard was. The cabin held its collective breath as Leonard moved into action. Every eye followed him, some in curiosity, some in disbelief. Vanessa's confident posture faltered slightly. She knew she had underestimated him, but the story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. What Leonard did next would change everything. For Zoe, for himself, and for the people who thought they could ignore, dismiss, or humiliate him. Would Leonard succeed before it was too late? Could he protect Zoe and reclaim the respect that had been stripped away mid-flight? The engines hummed ominously. The locked door remained stubborn, and the tension in the cabin thickened. One wrong move, one miscalculation, and the situation could spiral completely out of control. And Leonard? He wasn't finished fighting. Not yet. The locked door rattled under Zoe's frantic pushes, the metallic clank echoing through the narrow cabin. Her voice, high and trembling, cut through the hum of the engines. "Grandpa, please, I can't get out." Leonard's heart felt like it had been struck by a thunderbolt. He had never felt fear like this. Fear not for himself, but for Zoe, the granddaughter he had spent a lifetime protecting. He leaned against the lavatory door, trying to calm his own pulse, trying to find a way past Vanessa's cold, dismissive stance. But she wasn't budging. She stood with her arms crossed, the picture of authority and indifference, letting Leonard's pleas hang in the air like smoke. "Vanessa," he barked, louder now, his voice carrying the weight of decades of command and respect. "Open the door. My granddaughter is trapped, and if you don't act immediately, there will be consequences." Her smirk deepened, as if she relished the drama she had created. "Sir, you can't just threaten me. Sit down, calm yourself. You're making everyone uncomfortable." Leonard froze for a split second, his mind racing. "Uncomfortable? I'm the one being ignored. My granddaughter is trapped, and you dare treat me like I'm the problem?" The indignity stung, hotter than any boardroom insult or failed business deal he had ever endured. He felt a surge of rage, sharp and electric, but beneath it, a deeper determination pulsed. He would not, could not, let Zoe suffer because of prejudice. He took a deep breath, lowering his voice so it was steady, cold, and precise. "Vanessa, you have one last chance to do your job. Unlock that door, now, or you will be held personally responsible for what happens next." Her eyes flicked to the passengers. Some were watching with curiosity, some with unease. No one moved, and that, more than anything, made Leonard's resolve harden. "They'll let injustice slide if I don't take charge myself." That was the turning point. Leonard, a man who had always solved problems with money, influence, and strategy, realized he had only one tool left: action. Immediate, decisive, unyielding action. He scanned the cabin quickly, observing the crew, the layout, the emergency equipment, and then he saw it. The latch above the door, a small metal lever that could override the lock. Most passengers wouldn't notice it. Most flight attendants wouldn't dare touch it. But Leonard was no ordinary man. He crouched slightly, pretending to inspect the surrounding panel for a moment, buying time, keeping Vanessa distracted. She didn't notice his subtle movements, her attention still fixed on asserting control, on making him look foolish in front of everyone. Leonard's mind moved faster than his heartbeat. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. Suddenly, Zoe screamed, louder and sharper this time. "Grandpa! Please, I'm scared!" That was all the fuel Leonard needed. He sprang forward, deftly manipulating the latch. Metal clicked. The door gave slightly. He gritted his teeth and twisted it with force. Another click. And then, just as Vanessa took a step forward, her expression shifting from smugness to shock, the door swung open. Zoe stumbled out, her small body trembling, and Leonard wrapped her in a protective embrace, his arms a shield against the world. "It's okay, Zoe. You're safe now." "You're safe," he whispered, though inside, his fury was roaring like a storm. Vanessa opened her mouth, perhaps to assert herself, but Leonard didn't give her the space. He turned to the cabin, every passenger's eyes now on him. His voice, calm but unmistakably authoritative, filled the aisle. "What just happened here is unacceptable. I do not tolerate incompetence or prejudice, especially when it puts someone's safety at risk. You have humiliated me and endangered my granddaughter. That ends now." Gasps rippled through the cabin. Some passengers whispered, others stared, frozen. Leonard's gaze returned to Vanessa. She paled slightly under the weight of his eyes, realizing that this was not a man who could be dismissed or underestimated. "You," Leonard said, his voice low, sharp, and unrelenting. "Step aside and take responsibility for your actions, or I will ensure you are held accountable. I don't care who you think you are. You do not get to harm a child because of who I am, because of the color of my skin, because you think you have power over me. Do you understand?" Vanessa opened her mouth again, stammering something about procedure, about rules, about he shouldn't, but Leonard cut her off with a single hand raised. Silence fell instantly. The cabin was hushed, every pair of eyes watching this confrontation unfold like a storm about to break. Leonard didn't pause. He pulled out his phone, dialing the airline's emergency contact line. As he spoke, his voice steady, commanding, the crew around him began to shift nervously. The realization spread. Leonard had influence, authority, and resources far beyond the narrow confines of this cabin. He wasn't just a passenger. He was a man who could turn tables faster than anyone could anticipate. Zoe, still trembling, clung to his arm. Leonard lowered his voice just enough so she could hear. "I've got you, Zoe. Nothing is going to hurt you. Not now, not ever. You're safe because I won't let anyone treat you or me like we're invisible." Meanwhile, Vanessa's composure crumbled. Her smirk had vanished, replaced by a sharp, panicked edge. Leonard's calm, methodical escalation had stripped her of the power she thought she held. She was no longer the one in control. She had underestimated the wrong man. Passengers began to murmur, a few nodding subtly in Leonard's favor. The power shift was tangible, almost electric in the air. Leonard's eyes scanned the cabin one last time, lingering briefly on those who had watched silently, some complicit in their inaction. He didn't need their approval, but he wanted the lesson to be clear. No one, regardless of rank or prejudice, could intimidate him or his family. Then, with one final deliberate tone, Leonard turned fully to Vanessa. "Your behavior is over. The airline will hear about this. Your job, your authority, and your ability to treat anyone this way, consider it gone. This is not a negotiation. This is justice." Her lips pressed together, a faint tremor in her hand, and for the first time, she realized the enormity of underestimating him. Leonard didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to shout. Every word, every pause, every calculated glance conveyed absolute control. Zoe, now holding tightly to his hand, whispered, "Grandpa, you're amazing." Leonard smiled, but it wasn't a smile of triumph. It was a smile of protection, of relief, of the quiet satisfaction of righting a wrong. "Stay close, Zoe. Let's finish this flight together." But the climax wasn't just in the locked door or the confrontation. It was in the shift. Leonard had taken a situation designed to humiliate, designed to assert dominance over him and his family, and he had turned it completely on its head. He had saved Zoe. He had exposed prejudice. And he had shown everyone in that cabin that power and dignity are not given, they are claimed. As Leonard and Zoe returned to their seats, the cabin slowly settled. Whispered conversations began to rise, passengers processing what had happened. Some avoided eye contact, unsure of how to react. Others looked at Leonard with new respect, awe tempered by the realization of how easily injustice had been hiding in plain sight. Vanessa, meanwhile, stepped aside, her expression unreadable but her posture defeated. She had lost control, not through intimidation or argument, but because she had misjudged the man standing before her. She had assumed wealth and age would make him pliable, that his skin would mark him as less deserving of respect. She was wrong, and Leonard? He sat back, holding Zoe's hand, breathing deeply. The engines hummed steadily, the cabin lights reflecting softly on the faces around them. He knew this wasn't the end, not of prejudice, not of injustice, but in that moment, he had claimed victory. Not through anger, not through force, but through courage, intelligence, and an unwavering commitment to protect his family. The sky above them was calm, the plane steady, but the lesson was clear. Underestimate a man like Leonard, and the consequences will be undeniable. The climax hung in the air like a charged storm, the kind that leaves everyone changed. Aware that something extraordinary had just unfolded in the confines of an ordinary flight, and as Leonard glanced at Zoe, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face, he knew the fight was never just about one locked door. It was about proving, in the most powerful way, that dignity, courage, and justice could not be denied. And yet, as the flight continued toward California, a question lingered in the minds of those who had witnessed it all. What would Leonard do next to ensure that this injustice never repeated? The tension in the cabin finally eased, but the air was still thick with residual whispers and half-glances. Leonard held Zoe's hand as they walked toward their seats, both of them shaken but alive. Passengers who had witnessed the confrontation now looked at him with newfound respect, some nodding quietly, others raising their eyebrows in silent acknowledgement. The injustice that had unfolded mere moments ago had been flipped. The billionaire grandfather wasn't just a victim of Vanessa's arrogance and prejudice. He had reclaimed authority, dignity, and justice in one decisive act. Vanessa sat at the front of the plane, her composure shattered. The smirk was gone, replaced by a pale, strained expression that betrayed both fear and regret. Leonard didn't raise his voice, didn't shout or make threats in a loud, dramatic way. He let the calm power of truth speak. Every passenger had seen the arrogance, the dismissal, the subtle racism, and now the world watched as she faced the consequences. When the plane landed, Leonard did not leave things to chance. Before disembarking, he requested the immediate presence of the airline's management. Leonard's reputation and influence were not just tools for personal gain. They were instruments to ensure fairness, to hold the negligent accountable. Vanessa's actions had been reckless and discriminatory, and Leonard intended to see justice done. The airline supervisors arrived looking nervous, their expressions betraying awareness of the seriousness of the situation. Leonard calmly recounted every detail: the locked bathroom, Zoe's fear, Vanessa's refusal to act, and the public humiliation that he endured. Each word was precise, unembellished, and damning in its simplicity. No money could erase the truth. No influence could mask what had been seen by dozens of passengers. Within hours, Vanessa was suspended pending investigation. Leonard insisted on formal documentation of the incident, ensuring that no one could downplay what had happened. The airline apologized to both Leonard and Zoe, acknowledging the mishandling of the situation and pledging to improve staff training to prevent such discriminatory behavior in the future. Leonard's intervention had not only secured justice for Zoe, but had exposed systemic failures that could now be addressed. But the real victory wasn't in punishment. It was in empowerment. Zoe, still shaken, looked up at her grandfather with awe. "Grandpa, you didn't just save me. You made her see that she can't get away with that," she whispered. Leonard smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "Sometimes," he said, "people forget that courage isn't loud. It's steady. It's knowing the right thing to do, even when others refuse to see it." The incident reverberated beyond the plane, Word of Leonard's confrontation spread through social media. Passengers who had recorded snippets shared them online, highlighting how a young girl's safety and dignity had been nearly compromised by prejudice and arrogance. Comments flooded in, a mix of shock, outrage, and admiration. Many praised Leonard's composed yet firm response, calling it a masterclass in accountability and justice. Others shared their own experiences with discrimination, inspired to speak up or act differently in their communities. For Leonard, the impact was deeply personal. He had always known the fragility of reputation, the way society sometimes judged him for his race rather than his accomplishments. But the experience strengthened his resolve to fight against subtle and overt prejudice wherever he encountered it. It reminded him that courage was not merely about wealth or status. It was about standing firm, acting decisively, and protecting those who depended on you. Zoe, meanwhile, carried a new understanding of justice. She had witnessed firsthand how courage, calm reasoning, and moral clarity could overcome cruelty, arrogance, and systemic indifference. She also learned that being powerless in the moment didn't mean giving up. There were ways to reclaim agency, even in the most constrained situations. Leonard's actions taught her that age, experience, and wisdom could be wielded to protect, inspire, and correct wrongs in ways that sheer anger or retaliation could never achieve. In the days that followed, Leonard and Zoe reflected on the experience. They spoke openly about racism, privilege, and the responsibilities that came with influence. Leonard emphasized to Zoe that fighting prejudice wasn't just about winning a single confrontation. It was about creating ripple effects that could educate, prevent harm, and transform societal attitudes. Together, they brainstormed ways to support initiatives that trained airline staff and corporate employees to recognize and respond to discrimination effectively, ensuring that no child or adult would ever feel dismissed or endangered because of who they were. At the same time, the incident left Vanessa with a bitter taste of accountability. Her suspension and the looming threat of permanent termination were sobering reminders that prejudice carried real consequences. It was a lesson she would not forget, a moment where arrogance, dismissal, and subtle racism collided with unwavering moral authority, and she had lost. The story underscored a powerful truth. Racism and prejudice may seem like small, insidious acts in the moment, but they always leave a trail, and someone willing to confront them can transform humiliation into justice. The broader lesson reached beyond the confines of the airline cabin. Communities that ignore injustice, that allow arrogance and discrimination to fester unchecked, weaken themselves. Families are torn apart, children learn fear instead of courage, and societal trust erodes. But when individuals act with integrity, decisiveness, and moral clarity, they can not only correct a wrong, they can inspire countless others to do the same. Leonard understood this deeply. His life had been defined by power, strategy, and the creation of wealth. But this confrontation reminded him that true influence was measured not by bank accounts or boardrooms, but by courage, decency, and the ability to protect those who could not protect themselves. As Leonard and Zoe finally exited the airport in California, the sun setting in a golden blaze over the horizon, there was a quiet sense of triumph in the air. Zoe clutched his hand tightly, a mix of exhaustion and relief etched on her face. "Grandpa, thank you," she said, voice soft but unwavering. "I'll never forget this. You didn't just save me, you taught me how to stand up too." Leonard smiled, squeezing her hand. "That's the point, Zoe. Courage isn't about fighting everyone. It's about fighting when it matters, and protecting those who need you most." And in that moment, Leonard realized something profound. The incident on that plane, the confrontation with Vanessa, the exposure of prejudice and arrogance. It wasn't just a victory for him or Zoe. It was a small, potent reminder to the world that courage, justice, and unity could overcome discrimination, humiliation, and systemic indifference. That even at 30,000 feet, in the most confined and vulnerable of spaces, morality and resolve could prevail. The story of Leonard and Zoe became more than a tale of wealth or status. It became a story of humanity, resilience, and the power of one person to challenge the injustice around them. It reminded everyone watching, listening, or reading that racism destroys families, prejudice weakens communities, and that unity, courage, and moral clarity bring healing. In the end, Leonard didn't just rescue his granddaughter, he restored faith, dignity, and the hope that even small acts of bravery could ripple outward, changing hearts and minds long after the plane had landed. And as they walked into the warm California evening, Leonard and Zoe carried with them a lesson that would last a lifetime. Hate can be confronted, injustice can be corrected, and courage, steady, relentless, and true, can always triumph over prejudice.